Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2024 Las Vegas Grand Prix. Pretty exciting race, decent amount of overtaking, close racing. Pretty expected result, unexpected result, all things considered, going into the Grand Prix. And of course, we had our new four-time world champion crowned. So for the power rankings this week, it was a little bit tricky. There weren't any drivers I felt were clearly, the worst for the bottom end. At the top end, a little bit easier, but definitely the bottom end a little bit more difficult, I felt, this weekend. So starting right away with the driver who, while he did have a good recovery drive on the Grand Prix on Saturday, I was about to say Sunday there, but had to recover from a pretty poor qualifying, and at the same time still finished, 50 seconds behind his teammate, finished behind junior team. And that is, of course, let's see if I can get this right. That is, of course, Sergio Perez. So for Perez, qualified or started the race 15th, got moved his way up to 10th. Okay race, some good overtakes. He had that double overtake on Tsunoda and Magnussen. Qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by 8.5 tenths of a second, which is in reality just not acceptable. And again, like I said, while moving back up into the points was okay, he still finished behind two midfield cars, and it would have likely been three without Gasly's DNF. So really not really an acceptable result this weekend, in my opinion. So I've decided to put him in 20th. So moving up to number 19. Oh no, that's the wrong way. Number 19, Franco Colapinto. So for Colapinto, not a great weekend, and honestly, I could have put him a little bit higher, but he was really the only driver who had a massive incident or a massive crash during either qualifying or the Grand Prix. The Grand Prix itself wasn't fantastic, so I decided to put him in 19th. Of course, originally he qualified 14th, but was forced to start from the pit lane because of his big crash, pushing a little bit too hard, and a really clumsy mistake in qualifying, which of course meant that he had to start from the pit lane and basically erased any hope for him to score points. That being said, did out-qualify his teammate Alex Albon by 6.5 tenths. That was helped by Albon's fastest time being deleted for track limits, but still, a decent result there. And for Colapinto, he was able to recover back to 14th. So not quite points, but still, I think it was an okay recovery drive given that he started from the pit lane. Number 18, Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, he started the Grand Prix in 14th, was out-qualified by his teammate by 1.1 seconds. I think really, very scruffy second lap. Didn't bother to set time. I think he just abandoned the lap and went into the pits. So that was not great. Race strategy was also a bit of an issue. RB went with a very strange strategy. I think they looked like they were trying to go for a one-stopper. Left Lawson out way too late for the second stop, and I think that really affected his overall position. Otherwise, he could have easily finished 11th or 12th, or even 13th, I would say, without that. But that being said, throughout the whole course of the whole weekend, I did feel like Lawson was just not on the pace of Tsunoda, and probably his weakest race from the four races that he's done so far this year. All right, moving up to number 17. And number 17, I'm going to go with Valtteri Bottas. For Bottas, it was a weekend that was compromised from the get-go, as he took a 5 points grid penalty for basically a power unit part change. Ended up qualifying 19th, out-qualified by 3.5 seconds by his teammate Zhou, but he did give his teammate Zhou basically a tow and kind of sacrifice his own qualifying with that. So again, I'm not going to put too much stock into that. The race itself was pretty poor. Ended up finishing 18th on the road, last classified finisher, and yeah, the strategy was a bit of a disaster as well. So all things considered, pretty bad Grand Prix for Bottas, but I do think there were some mitigating circumstances which is why I've decided to not put him lower on this list. Number 16, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Qualified 11th, out-qualified by his teammate by 3.5 tenths. I really felt like there was a really big gap between himself and his teammate Pierre Gasly, who of course qualified P3 in that really shocking qualifying result. So I do feel like there was a little bit more on the table there. Probably should have gotten himself into Q3 with the pace that the car had. In the race, his race was heavily compromised. Ended up doing a 3-stop strategy. three-stop strategy because the first time, I think the first or second time he went through the pit lane, there was only one Alpine mechanic in the pit box ready to take him in. So he really just had a drive-through penalty there for absolutely no reason. So obviously, again, similar to Bottas, some mitigating circumstances for why the race result was so bad. But, again, finished 17th on the road and always looked a little bit off his teammates' pace this weekend. Moving up to number 15, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen, qualified 12th, out-qualified by his teammate by 1.8 tenths of a second, or what? Yeah, let's see, no, 1.8 tenths. Yeah, that's right. 1.8 tenths. In the race, I think had a pretty bad strategy. Was doing a one-stop strategy for some reason. Came home to 12th, which I think is an okay result, all things considered. But again, a little bit off of his teammates' pace. Moving up to number 14, I'm going to go with Alex Albon. Qualifying was a little bit scruffy, qualified 17th, and again, 6.5 tenths gap between himself and his teammate Franco Colapinto with that track deletion, or that time deletion because of track limits. About through the first third of the race, I would say after the first pit stops for sure, Albon looked like he might have been able to challenge for the final point, or final point paying position, or even get a little bit higher than that as he was running in 10th, but unfortunately mechanical DNF for him, so he had to retire, and we'll never be able to know what exactly Albon's pace could have been in the latter half of the race. I would have put him a little bit higher, but that poor qualifying there, so I decided to put him a little bit lower. Alright, number 13, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. Does seem a little bit high, but I think there were a lot of circumstances going against Stroll going into this weekend, and I thought he generally did a decent job in the situation he was in the situation he had. So qualified, started the race 18th, qualified dead last in 20th, out-qualified by 2 tenths of a second, but he only had one running Q1, went out very, very late because of some mechanical issue on the car, so again, not Stroll's fault. And he also had to push extremely hard on his outlap to be able to make the cutoff for Q1. So of course, tires were not in the optimum window. One only had one lap to really go for it. So again, qualifying, I can understand why he was out qualified by 2 tenths. I'm not too worried about that. And then the race, he didn't have any radio, so he actually had a 20-second pit stop, it seems, because basically he and his race engineer couldn't communicate about when they were coming in for their pit stop. They couldn't really adjust their strategy, given that tire wear was a lot higher than it was expected to be. That's obviously a pretty big deal. So the fact that he still ended up 15th, I thought was a decent result. A lot of things going against him this weekend, but still, I think all things considered, not too bad for Stroll. Number 12, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri, qualified 8th, only out-qualified by his teammate by 25 thousandths of a second, so very, very close between himself and Norris in qualifying. So I thought, qualifying was actually much better this weekend than it's been at some recent races. But that being said, I think the performance on Saturday in the race was a little bit lackluster. Got that 5-second penalty for the false, basically for the false start, being out of position at the start, which I think was a little bit of a clumsy mistake on Piastri's part. That obviously forced him, really compromised his race, as it meant at the first pit stop, he had to sit in his pit box for 5+ seconds, longer than he would have, and then he had to overtake a ton of cars in the second stint of the race. So that's really why he was so far off his teammate in the end. No on the official timing, because Norris obviously had one to pit for fastest lap at the end. It obviously looked closer than was, but in reality he was about like 20 to 30 seconds behind his teammate. But still not a terrible Grand Prix, I felt, for Piastri. Number 11, I'm going to go with Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, excellent result in qualifying compared to what he's been able to do recently. Qualified, started the race in 13th, out-qualified his teammate Bottas by 3.5 tenths. Pace in the race not really there. Really felt like he was sinking, especially the last stint of the race. I think towards the halfway mark, he was very, very close to the points, but still a very good result for Zhou. And that's why I've decided to put him, much higher than about, as high as I would usually put the Sauber drivers. I put Bottas, very, very close to 9th, 10th, 11th, when I felt he's had a very good weekend. That's just kind of the way it is, given that they're so far, adrift in no man's land. All right, so moving into the top 10, 10th, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso. For Alonso, qualified 16th, out-qualified his teammate Stroll by about 0.2 of a second, which again, okay result, but again, did get knocked out in Q1. And I think if you took the best time from each of the 10 teams in qualifying, Aston Martin had the worst time of all 10, which is pretty damning that, you're slower than Williams, you're slower than Sauber, and yeah, it's a big fall off in one lap pace compared to where they started at the beginning of the season, where they were actually faster than Mercedes, the team that obviously got pole and won this weekend's race. But for Alonso, race I thought was really impressive. Went on a very, very aggressive strategy, starting on the softs, pitted very, very early, and had very strong pace and clean air to basically undercut, I think, 6 to 7 drivers. And then was very, very close to getting a point, just didn't have the tire wear, the life in the tires at the end of the race. Number 9, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc, qualified 4th, out-qualified by his teammate by 3.7 and then finished the race in 4th. For Leclerc, he had a very, very good start, got himself up into 2nd place for the first stint, but then unfortunately for him, I think pushed a little bit too hard, cooked his tires, and I think that really heavily compromised the rest of his race. I know there's a lot of shenanigans between himself and Sainz about, which driver was supposed to be ahead, which one was driving, which driver was respecting the, whatever they had agreed to before the race and all that. But for that being said, for Leclerc, qualifying not great. Definitely was expecting him to be in the fight for pole, and given how small the gap was between Russell and Sainz, I think there was definitely an opportunity there, I think, for Leclerc to get pole. And then, the rest of the race was kind of managing tires, and was just kind of adrift in no man's land really for the rest of the race. Didn't really have an opportunity to fight for the win. And again, obviously lost that podium position as well to his teammate Sainz. All right, number 8, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Now, for Hamilton, definitely a weekend of two halves. If you were doing this ranking based on qualifying, he would probably be in the bottom 4 or 5 drivers. If you're doing this ranking purely based on the race, he would easily be in the top 4 to 5 drivers. That being said, qualified 10th, out-qualified by his teammate by an unfortunately a very massive margin of 15.794 seconds. And that was, of course, because on Hamilton's 2 flying laps in Q3, 2 very big mistakes, and unfortunately for him, in a car that got pole position, he qualified in 10th. So massively compromised his race, and this has unfortunately been a pattern for Hamilton this year, where he's just had a lot of very, very scruffy qualifying sessions that have really compromised his ability to get a good result on a Sunday, or in this case, Saturday. And it will be really interesting to see if that trend continues when he goes to Ferrari in 2025, or if perhaps Ferraris are perhaps a more gentle car, more drivable car, and he's able to push like he did, in his heyday. But then again, race very, very good. Charged through the field, got himself up into 2nd. At points looked like he might challenge Russell, but I think Russell was doing a really good job of controlling things. And I think even if they started P1, P2, I think it would have been very, very competitive between the two of them. I don't think it's an absolute guarantee that Hamilton would have just won the Grand Prix and won it off into the distance, gone off into the distance by 10, 20 seconds like he did when Bottas was his teammate, for example. So, number 7, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. For Norris, of course, finally mathematically eliminated from Drivers' Championship contention. I think, honestly, for him, it seems like in a lot of his post-race interviews, he seems almost relieved that he doesn't have to think about the title anymore. I think, obviously, this year was a very, very big learning experience for Norris. It'll be very interesting to see how he kind of bounces back in going into 2025. So a lot of comparables between himself, 2024 to 2025 to Sebastian Vettel 2009 to 2010 to see how obviously I think very, very comparable situations between those two drivers. So it'll be really interesting to see how Norris kind of bounces back from this setback. The race itself, pretty anonymous, qualified 6th, out-qualified his teammate by 25 thousandths of a second, like I said before. Very, very small margin. I did think there was a little bit more pace in the car. Probably should have been ahead of the Red Bull, especially given all the issues that Red Bull had this weekend with their rear wings and their setups and all that. And then in the race, finished 6th, got fastest lap. I think in the race could have been ahead of Verstappen, but again, very, very hard to say there with absolute certainty. All right, number 6. I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda. Very, very good race by the RB driver. Qualified 7th, out-qualified his teammate by, again, 1.1 seconds. I thought did a very, very good job to split the McLarens in qualifying, out-qualifying Oscar Piastri. In the Grand Prix, I think a little bit unfortunate that he wasn't best of the rest. But that being said, I thought he had a pretty good race and did a very good job, I thought, to pick up 2 very valuable points for the team in 9th place, as they were in that very, very tight fight for 6th, 7th, and 8th in the constructors' fight with Haas and with Alpine. Now, speaking of his that championship fight, number 5, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, kind of a heartbreaking weekend. Friday portion of the weekend was excellent. Qualified P3, out-qualified his teammate by about 3.5 seconds, or not 3.5 seconds, 3.5 tenths, and an absolutely shocking result. Split the Ferraris. Of course, out-qualified Max Verstappen as well, beat both McLarens. It's definitely a result that no one saw coming, especially in dry conditions. Sometimes we see these kinds of results in wet qualifying sessions, but it's so rare that you'll see a car qualify, a midfield car qualify that high in a dry qualifying session. And then I think obviously lost a couple positions at the start of the race, which I think was understandable. The Alpine just didn't have the race pace of the other cars. But unfortunately, engine failure, and he was unfortunately forced to retire from the race. So even though he DNF, didn't get a single point, I felt like obviously mechanical DNF, not his fault. And qualifying was so good. As well. So, I think 5th is an appropriate place for Gasly. Now, number 4, kind of, representative, the constructors fight in Miniature. We have Hülkenberg 4th, Gasly 5th, Tsunoda 6th. For Hülkenberg, very, very good weekend, I thought. Qualified 9th, out-qualified his teammate by 1.8 tenths, and then did a really good job in the race. Came home 8th, best of the rest, and I thought really good job managing the tires, and also had a very aggressive strategy this weekend. They pitted 1 to 2 laps later than everyone else, which at the end of the stint, hypothetically on those simulations, it'll look great because you'll have much better pace than everyone else. But of course, the trade-off is that you have to be able to overtake those cars to make the strategy work. And Hülkenberg did exactly that, did a really good job overtaking cars and made that strategy work to get best of the rest for the team. All right, moving into the top 3. Number 3, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. Qualified 2nd, finished the race in 3rd. For Sainz, I thought qualifying was excellent. Out-qualified his teammate by 3.7 tenths. And was very, very close to getting pole position, but not quite on the Mercedes' pace. In the race, I thought, the start of the race was a little bit scruffy. Obviously lost the position to his teammate Sainz, and then was kind of a little bit fortunate with how things played out with, Leclerc cooking his tires, and all that. But that being said, I do think he was also a little bit unlucky as well. He wanted to pit, I think a couple laps before Hamilton did, I think, for the second stop, and the team just were not ready. They told him not to, and there was, of course, the incident where he basically was in the pit entry and then just went straight and went back on the track. I'm assuming, in the race director's notes, they said it was okay, not a big deal. And usually it's only if it's explicitly written in the race director's notes for that weekend not to do that. That's where it's a penalty. Usually it's okay to go from pit lane to out, not the other way in, not the other way around, unless of course it's explicitly written in the director's notes for the weekend. But for Sainz, I thought decent pace the rest of the race. And solid pace the second, third stints, and came home for a pretty well-deserved podium for him. All right, now into the top 2. Number 2, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen, your newly crowned 4-time world champion. Qualifying, I think, really did the best he could. Honestly, I was expecting a repeat of Singapore 2023, where they're basically knocked out in Q2. But I thought Verstappen did a pretty good job to out-qualify both McLarens in 5th. And of course, obviously also out-qualified his teammate Sergio Perez by 8.5 tenths of a second. Really strong pace in the race. First stint was excellent. In second place, looking like he was going to get a podium, perhaps challenge Russell for the win, but the second, third stint, for whatever reason, Red Bull just cooked its tires, and he couldn't really push, and he basically just dropped down to 5th, knowing that with Norris being well behind him, the world championship was still going to be won anyway. So really, really good race for Verstappen. I thought really did a good job of capitalizing on, what is one of Red Bull's weaker tracks for sure, given that they didn't have an optimal rear wing. Number one, I think pretty obvious though, all things considered, your pole sitter, your race winner, and that is of course George Russell. Excellent pole position, and then in the race, we didn't actually see him much on camera because he was just off by himself for most of it. But for Russell, controlled the start really well, and then just controlled his pace throughout. Made sure he wasn't using his tires too much, left quite a bit of pace in hand at the end, especially when Hamilton was catching him, kept his cool. And then, when Hamilton got very close, he just picked up the pace, very reminiscent of what Hamilton would do back in, 2017, back in 2018. So very, very well done for Russell, and that's why I've decided to put him first in my power rankings for the 2024 Las Vegas Grand Prix. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with my preview of the Qatar Grand Prix in a couple days' time. Goodbye.